I am very pleased that John White has agreed to talk with me today about our accountability system in the United States and the various efforts to raise standards through Common Core and through many other actions taken at state levels. John White is the state superintendent for education for the state of Louisiana and was also deputy chancellor in New York City, so he has a breadth of knowledge about how the intergovernmental system needs to work. And it's very especially interesting to talk with somebody who has been so successful in Louisiana at raising student performance from what was second to the bottom to the most rapidly improving state in the United States under his leadership. So John, it's great to have you with me today.
Great to be here.
And I would like to ask you, is testing an important part of your thinking? Is holding schools accountable an important part of your thinking about how you get gains in student performance and a more effective educational system?
It is, and no question that measurement has to be an important component of any plan for success. There's a lot of ways that we can improve testing, a lot of ways that we can improve our accountability systems. The Every Student Succeeds Act, I think, at least calls us to seriously consider those questions in the states. There are some serious risks involved in all of this too, but no question, the step to begin to measure learning is an important one. It can be done better, it can be done more efficiently, but it's a critical component as a starting point of any plan for change.
Well, just a lot of people were on board with this idea back in 2002 when No Child Left Behind was introduced into Congress in a bipartisan coalition. Democrats and Republicans alike supported this by overwhelming margin. But as time went on, a lot of opposition developed to the testing and the holding schools accountable that was required by No Child Left Behind. What did they do wrong, or why did that political opposition develop?
Well, I think there's a difference between what was done wrong and why the political opposition developed. But I think that in terms of what was done wrong, and the president has talked about this, it has spawned an industry, no question about that. And I'm not sure if every element of that industry is what we want. We don't need our kids taking tests every day, multiple times over the course of a day. It should be a checkup, and that's what it is. And it's fair to say that we or the establishment or industry have not effectively communicated to parents, this is how this benefits you. This is not just a crusade to benefit the disenfranchised. This is for everybody. This is beneficial. And we haven't done as much as we needed to communicate that.
Well, one of the mistakes that I thought was made by No Child Left Behind was the adequate yearly progress way of defining what was a good school instead of looking at how much kids are learning in the course of 1 year. How much more do they know this year than they did 1 year ago? Which I would have thought would have been the logical way of trying to find out if a school is effective or not.
The good news is people, I think, discovered that quickly, years into No Child Left Behind, that the idea of just how many students are at a certain level in a certain school is not really an effective way of measuring the effect of that school. In our state, for example, if you look at the A schools, or the schools that are rated A, 30% in some schools, 90% of struggling students in those schools are hitting the mark. In some of those A-rated schools, only 30% of the struggling students are hitting the mark. So you've got wide differences when you really dig into the data behind what is in an A school.
So you will give an A to a school where the students are performing at a fairly low level if they're showing substantial improvement from 1 year to the next.
Well, I think we should do that. I think right now what we do, and I probably didn't explain it as well as I should have, but what we do is we give A's to schools that are making great strides with kids. We also give A's to some schools that aren't making great strides but just have high-performing kids to begin with. And there's obviously a distinction there. An A school can be one where kids are just performing at a high level, but it can also be one where kids came performing at a deplorably low level and then really made gains. That's an A also, and we need to redefine in our state and in many states what constitutes an A school.
Now, the state school chief officers, I've forgotten exactly how that name goes, but and the governors, the National Governors Association, agreed to put into place Common Core state standards. That was backed by the Obama administration with its Race to the Top initiative and its waiver policies so that states didn't have to abide by some of those NCLB requirements if, in fact, they would adopt the Common Core state standards and make other reforms as well. So once again, this at the beginning had widespread support. And well, let's first of all talk about that widespread support. Do you agree that it was there at the beginning?
I do, and the most simple way that I can rationalize it in my mind and for those that I work with is we have historically been the 48th or 49th ranked state in the country in academics. We have historically been in the top 5 in football. The reason we're in the top 5 in football is because we're willing to go to any state and we're willing to compete. But in academics, it's always just been, well, how did one town in Louisiana do against another town? We can't get to the top in a valid way unless we're willing to go to any state and put our education system up against it. That's how you grow. That's how you progress, is you're willing to open your doors and to compete. So the principles of success on the football field are principles of success in our academic system. If we don't have something that we share with other states, the ability to measure ourselves against everybody else, there's not really a valid platform for how we need to progress.
But a lot of people feel like, okay, the history of education in the South in general, Louisiana included, is very different than the history of education in the Northeast, where you've had, back to the days of the Pilgrims, a real commitment to teaching children early on. Is it fair to put them all on the same platform and say, you've got to be compared to those people in other parts of the country, not just your own state?
Well, there's a difference between what's fair to the adults and what's fair to the students, and you need to be fair to both. We have 300 years of subjugation of African American people in our state. We are an agrarian state that is coming into a 21st century economy, a natural resources state. I'm not going to argue that that's the same conditions in which Massachusetts or New York or a state in the Northeast operates in. Clearly, we come into this from a different perspective. But what is fair to the kids who are inheriting in the year 2016 a multinational, seriously competitive economy is to have expectations that are those that the workforce will have for them, which is you should be able to work and live and succeed anywhere. What's fair to the adults is not to demoralize everybody just because you have those high expectations. And you can do both of those things. You can have a system that has the highest expectations possible for children while having a rational system of improvement for the adults who operate the system.
So the Common Core Standards principle is one that you endorse, you continue to endorse, despite the political opposition that developed on both the right and the left of the political spectrum. The Tea Party opposed it, a lot of teacher unions opposed it, a lot of teachers have opposed Common Core. So I want to ask especially about the teachers. Why did opposition to Common Core state standards develop among teachers?
Well, I support the principle of what those standards embody, which is interstate competition. We have our own standards in Louisiana called the Louisiana Student Standards that allow us to remain comparable with states across the country, and I support those standards. With respect to teachers first, there is no one teacher voice, and I am sick and tired of people saying that teachers view this or teachers believe it that way. Every year I get in a room with 5,000 or 6,000 teachers in New Orleans for a gathering called our Teacher Leaders. There are 5,000 or 6,000 different views about a lot of different stuff in there. But there is no one in that room who's just against progress. And I actually think that when you engage teachers in a conversation, you empower them with curriculum that they actually know is aligned to the standards. They get fired up about the state standards, in our case, Louisiana student standards. There may have been, I think, some steps along the way that didn't give teachers the tools they needed to be confident when they were doing it. And when you're not confident, you're fearful. And when you're fearful, you say it. And that happened a lot in some states, including our own, occasionally. But I think we've bridged that gap. We've gotten beyond it. And I'll tell you, I don't feel any more support for high expectations from any group more than I do from teachers.
What I think I'm hearing, John, is that you're saying there's been a lot of political conflict over Common Core state standards, but this movement towards setting standards that are closer to being the same across the states is not going to go away. There's more and deeper support. We've seen this with our Education Next poll, that in fact there is a lot of support for similar standards across the country. And I don't know if that's just what people say in response to questions but I think I hear you're saying that there is support for that.
I believe that in a state that has historically been rated low, that our kids are born just as smart and just as capable as any kids in this country. I believe they have gifts and talents that are no lesser than those of the children in any other state. And I believe the people of Louisiana want control of the education system there, but they also support the idea that our kids can compete and deserve a level playing field. And they shouldn't have to wait until the ACT in 11th grade to get it.
Well, we have a new law called the Education, I can't remember how it goes.
Every Student Succeeds Act.
Every Student Succeeds Act. So how is this affecting the whole setting of standards and the setting of accountability?
It's a big question. I mean, I think it's a big if. States have a lot more control, even districts have a lot more control over these questions than they did under not just No Child Left Behind, but the waivers to No Child Left Behind. And I think whether states make a decision that on some elements they're going to compete, that's still left up in the air. States also now have the requirement to use measures in their system that aren't just about tests. And how innovative those things will be, how much of a free pass those things will be, I think there's a lot up in the air on those questions.
So we don't know exactly where we're going in our educational system as we enter the latter part of the second decade of the 21st century. There's a lot of questions yet to be answered. But if we don't improve our schools, how are we going to be a continually prosperous country as we move into the 21st century?
It would be impossible for us to be, and you know, my hope, and I do believe that in many states this will happen, is that we'll go back to the record and we'll see that the following formula is a good formula for success. One, high expectations that are measured in a way where they can be validated across state lines. Two, an acceptance that our accountability system does need to evolve. There are higher achieving systems around the world that have non-tested measures. Look at New Zealand, for example, and look at what they've done with their system to great effect. And three, when schools go off the rails, and we all, in every state, have these issues, you need to be able to intervene, but we've got a decade of research now to show what works and what doesn't. So if you are willing to embrace change, willing to embrace high expectations, and follow the research when there's problems, that's a formula for success. I don't see why a state would go in a different direction from that, and if we do, it'll work.
Thank you, John. This has been a great opportunity to get to understand your philosophy and your strategy for school reform. Thank you very much.
Likewise. Thanks, Paul.